This presentation will be a short introduction to setting up, composing, and lighting a still life. Like many endeavors, setting up a still life can at first seem complicated, daunting, and even overwhelming. But if we apply the KISS acronym, keep it simple student, and break it down into parts and components, it becomes very manageable. While we're going to talk a little bit more about lighting your still life later, the first thing that you should think about is your ability to control the lighting in the environment that you're going to be working. Daylight can be the perfect environment to work. However, it's dependent on weather, season, and time of day, and it's constantly changing. This artist has solved the problem of constantly changing natural light by using artificial light to illuminate their still life setup. After you've gained control of the light in your working environment, it's time to consider the first major issue of setting up a still life. This first issue involves creating a space for your subject material to exist in, and to determine what kind of object or surface is going to serve as a background to your drawing. This artist has spray painted the inside of a large cardboard box. This creates the perfect environment for the still life material. Add a clamp light as your primary light source, and you are ready to draw. In order to control both the light in the workspace and the light that falls on the still life subject, this artist has used black foam core to create this elaborate shadow box, complete with overhead light. Not every still life space requires the construction of a shadow box. This space was created using two pieces of fabric. One was pinned to the wall to create the background, and the other was used to establish the table plane. The primary light source is a desk lamp, and the secondary light source is an inexpensive clamp-on lamp. It really doesn't get any more simple than this. Let's take a minute and talk about backgrounds. The background in this composition takes on a very active and powerful role. And while it's certainly appropriate for a background to take on such a role, backgrounds more frequently play a subordinate role to the other elements within the composition. Because of this, you may want to choose a background that's fairly simple, one without pattern and bright color. Value is another consideration when choosing a background. Note the dark value in this composition adds to the somber tone of the image. A dark valued background also reduces the amount of ambient light within the composition, while a bright or light colored background adds to that ambient light. The next phase of the process is to select the objects that you plan on including in your composition. While virtually any object or group of objects can be included in a still life, there are a few guidelines to consider. Selecting your objects on a thematic basis is a good way to convey an idea or a concept. This image conveys the idea of an early morning breakfast in a lonely diner. And that idea is successfully conveyed using a small handful of related objects. When selecting your objects, it may be a good idea to choose objects of different size. In addition to providing visual interest, objects of various sizes may help you solve compositional problems as well. For example, using all of the vertical space in a composition is a frequently encountered problem. This artist uses a fabric-covered crate to help move a few of the pieces of fruit higher into the picture plane. The addition of the guitar does three important things for this artist. It utilizes a great deal of the vertical space. It serves as background, and it balances the area with the crate and fruit. In addition to selecting objects of various sizes, it may be a good idea to look for variety in other aspects of the composition as well. While the elements in this composition are unified in terms of their theme, there is good variety in terms of shape and size, and especially color. The linear and angular components of the composition also offer a great deal of variety. Selecting objects with value contrast is another consideration. The onions and the glass of water are that much brighter for having a close relationship to the dark serving pitcher. Another issue to consider is the degree of difficulty an object presents to you as a drawer. If you select something particularly challenging and you struggle drawing that object, it will have a negative impact on the entire composition. Because of the organic nature of this piece of popcorn, it would be relatively forgiving to draw, and viewers would have a difficult time detecting errors in your drafting. Mechanical, man-made, and geometric objects are much less forgiving to draw. Because your viewers have a pre-existing concept of what these objects should look like, any errors are easily noticed. I have one last thought for you regarding the objects in your composition. Each object within the composition should have some particular role or function. Spend some time thinking about each object and asking yourself why you've included this object. It's important to be objective. If an object isn't serving some purpose, remove it from the composition. Don't allow an object to stay just because you have an emotional attachment to it, which might be meaningless to your viewers. Remember, be critical. Less is more. Once your objects have been selected, it's time to arrange those objects into an interesting, well-balanced composition. The ideas and concepts related to pictorial composition literally fill books. But again, let's try to keep this simple. One of the first things that you should think about as you begin to arrange your objects is balance. Because people are bipedal, we have developed a heightened, innate sense of balance. At first glance, you may think that this dancer has shifted too much weight to the left. But if you were to draw a vertical line straight up through the sole of the foot, you would realize that the mass is equally distributed on both sides of that line. Balance in visual composition works the same way. The goal is to achieve visual balance on both sides of a center line. There are several types of balance, but we're going to focus primarily on symmetrical balance and asymmetrical balance. It's obvious that this image displays symmetrical balance. Both sides of the image are identical, therefore it's balanced. While this image is balanced, it may not be the most exciting and dramatic still life ever created. This image displays asymmetrical balance. While both sides of the center line are very different from one another, the image feels balanced. This is achieved in part by the fact that the seashell directs the viewer's eye to the left side of the image, counterbalancing the heavy weight of the shell on the right. Directing the viewer's eye from one side of the composition to the other is just one of many techniques that artists use to create asymmetrical balance. Here's another example of asymmetrical balance. Balance is achieved in this image by shifting the heavy elements on the left-hand side slightly towards the center, and by elevating the elements on the right-hand side to a higher location in the picture plane, thereby adding visual weight to those elements. This image is balanced in the same sort of way. The central part of the image has been shifted slightly to the right to account for the weight of the elements on the left, and the elements on the right have been raised up in the picture plane, adding more visual weight to them by virtue of their location. Continuing to think about the seesaw analogy, I'm sure that you can think of many ways to balance a composition. Here, the weight of the large stone is balanced against the weight of several stones. The tic-tac-toe board superimposed over this image illustrates another simple device artists use to help organize pictorial space. The red lines divide the space into 3 vertical elements and 3 horizontal elements. This is called the rule of thirds. Perhaps the best use of the rule of thirds is to help an artist locate focal points within the composition. A focal point is that area of the composition that draws the viewer's eye. This image has 2 focal points. The primary focal point is the apple, and the secondary focal point is the corner of the books. Both of these were located using the rule of thirds. In this image, notice how the rule of thirds helps locate the position of the fruit. The banana is lying on the bottom horizontal line. The highlight on the mango lies on the top horizontal line, and the center of the mango lies at the intersection of the 2 lines in the upper right-hand corner. Another possible consideration is to arrange the elements in your composition in such a way as to create a spatial hierarchy. By moving objects both closer to and further from the picture plane, you begin to create that sense of depth and space. Allowing objects to overlap one another enhances that idea as well. The number of items used in a composition is also an important consideration. A single item might work, but 2 could certainly be more interesting. 3 seems to be an important number in many cultures. Using 3 objects within a composition is very common. But notice those 3 objects are placed in 2 groups, a group of 2 and a group of 1. Many artists believe that an odd number of objects in a composition is more pleasing than an even number. Here there are 5. Once the number of objects exceeds 10 or 11, however, all bets are off. Many artists believe that arranging their objects so they fit loosely within the confines of a triangle produces a successful composition. Other artists use the L shape to help arrange their objects. In my opinion, we've come to the most important part of creating a good still life. The way that you light your image can make all the difference between a powerful, dramatic drawing and something that is average or worse. I'd like to take a minute to emphasize the importance of good lighting. Many beginning artists underestimate its value when setting up a still life. The image on the left is lit only with overhead lighting. In the image on the right, the overhead lighting has been turned off and replaced with the single directional light source. If you notice the paper towel roll on the left-hand image, it seems very flat, while the paper towel roll in the right-hand image shows a great deal of dimension. Take a look at the dramatic differences between these two images. While the paper towel on the left seems fairly flat, the paper towel roll on the right-hand image contains all the elements of chiaroscuro. If you were attempting to make a drawing of the image on the left, you would have a hard time convincing your viewer that the roll of paper towel is dimensional. But because of the clues provided by chiaroscuro, your job would be much easier if you were trying to draw the right-hand image. The lighting in the image on the left has been left to chance. Notice that the overhead lights are on and the window shade is up, and no thought has been given to a directional light source. Also notice how flat and gray this still life composition seems. The lighting in the image on the right has been given a lot of thought. Notice that the overhead lights are turned off and the window shade has been pulled to allow for a secondary light source. Also notice that a powerful directional primary light source has been added. Take a minute and notice the reflected light on the right-hand side of the roll of paper towel. That reflected light is a very important clue that allows us to understand the dimensionality of that roll of paper towel. That reflected light is coming from the secondary light being allowed in through the window. Notice how blue they both are. As mentioned earlier, an important first step to success is to gain control of the ambient light in the room. This artist will be using daylight to create their artwork, but has controlled that light by the careful positioning of drapery and black foam core. Perhaps the simplest way to get started is to use a single light source for your composition. Begin by placing the still life subject matter behind the light. Now raise the light up above the still life and shift it to one side or the other. Now the light's perfectly positioned to create the chiaroscuro effect. Using that single light source, beautiful, high contrast, dramatic images like this can be achieved. To create a more fully illuminated image like this one, allow more of the ambient light from the room to fall on the still life. Also notice that the background is a light value, which will reflect even more light onto the composition. It's still important, however, to use a primary light source. This small clamp-on desk lamp serves perfectly. It's important to remember that the creative process doesn't end when you finish setting your objects up. Rather than lighting your object in a traditional preconceived way, play with a variety of lighting scenarios until you achieve the effect you want. By moving the light source around, in front, in back, from the side, down low, up high, you may discover an unexpected result. The cast shadow of the water in the glass is obviously an important component of this composition, and that was only achieved by lighting this image from behind. The light in this image was directed from the side and slightly behind in order to take advantage of the translucency of the orange. This bowl of strawberries was lit from directly above. This lighting created dark shadows and produced an interesting interplay between the shadows and the highlights created from the metallic bowl. It's important to remember that the way something's lit can have a significant effect on the balance of the composition. The dark, heavy shadows on the left are only balanced by the interesting and fine detail contained within the shoe and the dark value of the block that the shoe is sitting on. The still life, in one form or another, has been around almost as long as art itself. To this day, it remains an important genre of artistic expression. With a little thought, a lot of experimentation, a few missteps, and some failures, you should be able to improve the quality of your still life artwork. I hope this presentation will get you started in that direction. Good luck.